Warwick Ryan.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mark.
We'll see if we can change that during the interview. But
if you don't make me cry, Mark, you haven't done your job.
That's my policy too. Out of your own practice into the employment law partner role within Schwab. How has that transition happened?
Running a small business is hard work. And at some point in the process, you work out whether you are a better technician or a better businessman. And I think I decided some way down the road that I was probably a better technician than I was businessman. So at that point, you've got to make a decision. Do you want to continue to plough on as running the business plus doing the technical work, or do you want to specialise in one area? And it was, to some degree, it was also one of those too good to refuse offers where I put an ambit claim in and they went, okay.
Should we be sharing this now, or it's
a done deal?
Done. Okay.
Yeah. So they were more than. So of course, having done that, you go, damn it, that clearly wasn't ambit enough. Yeah. So that's what really drove it. The decision.
There's a real honesty in that too, because there's a lot of ego involved with running your own business.
Yeah, I think probably also the other aspect too was that by being associated with a larger firm, I had access to clients who were larger. And when you're an employment lawyer, that by definition means more employees, more issues. So you can have fewer clients with more issues, which means you're solving issues rather than trying to find new clients. And but back to the specific question, yes, I think I realised that skills in business is a unique skill set, and it's something that I didn't possess in spades. I had some general ideas, I had a general grasp of the disciplines, but it was. I think I realised organic growth in our firm was never going to happen at the scale and at the rate that I wanted.
Okay. Very honest. I appreciate that. Not that I would have expected anything less from you.
That's right.
Mr. Ryan.
Well, my practicing certificate's on the line.
Indeed. The growth. Were you based in Sydney, but spend most of your time on the Central Coast? Is that the way?
About half-half.
Okay.
About half-half, yeah. It's always an issue when you've got a head office. You've got to be down there and you've got to be a presence in the head office. Otherwise, when stuff goes wrong or appears to go wrong and you're not there to explain why decision X, Y and Z was made, then people start drawing adverse inferences as to your competency. And so it's important to be there and to have a presence there. But still, probably about at least 50% of my client base would be drawn from the Central Coast.
You've been here for 15 years or so. You've seen the changes in the Central Coast market, the business and economy of the Central Coast. How are we tracking?
In a general sense, it's an area that struggles for an economic identity. Its key drivers of confidence in a accentuated way still rely on construction and to some degree tourism, although tourism's kind of petering out a bit. But it's, in many respects, when that's not functioning, then we are a version of the Philippines. We are remittance workers. We disappear each day down into Sydney, about 40,000 of us, and we work down there and we bring money back from that economy into the Central Coast. There's been a quite a significant shift of business in some sense up here into areas like Summersby and into Wyong and of course into Tuggerah, but those businesses haven't really made a dent in the number of people who get in cars, get on trains, whatever, and head north and south. And that's a transition that I think if we're going to be a cohesive, clearly identifiable society, then that's going to have to happen. We're going to have to develop a much stronger economic identity here on the coast.
What does that look like, do you think? A stronger economy. What will it have as its pillars?
Okay. It's a matter of further developing a business case for why businesses would want to have their operations on the coast. And, the councils and the various regional authorities have done a very good job of convincing a number of businesses to set up here. Our competitor would be Wetherill Park, those sorts of areas, but unfortunately, and sort of the Tuggerah Business, not the Tuggerah Business Park, the Northwest Business Park, sort of somewhere between that. We don't have the zoning for the heavy industrial stuff that Wetherill Park does. And we have, whilst we've attracted some of that light commercial headquartery type business up here, it's a difficult sell because you're trying to attract management away from Sydney, and most management have identified their existence with living in Sydney, with access to education and all of that. And to move a headquarters, if you've got a choice between Northwest Business Park and the Central Coast, it's going to be very difficult to persuade a business to move their management up here. So you may end up with we've got to work out the industries that are going to survive up here. Logistics, that's an obvious one, can be up here, but, there may be all sorts of questions as to why people would not be. We're a long way from a port, we're a long way from, a number of other transport facilities.
Should we just embrace the dormitory position?
Well, I think that's an excellent alternative, but it has a massive cost impost associated with it, because to really do that well, you have to develop a functioning transport system which will allow people to move back and forth to Sydney in under an hour. Anything over an hour, and this will always be a poor man's alternative. It will largely be those who can't afford to live in Sydney and those who are, for whatever reason, decided to live up here for family or, a slightly slower pace of life or what have you. But when people... Do
we have a voice to present what you're presenting? I don't mind you becoming the solo mayor of the Central Coast, Warwick.
Okay.
We'll tackle that in a bit while. But do we have a voice that talks this way?
I don't know, because I don't know what is said.
You hear what's said.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what's said in it. From time to time, that we have these emissaries that go down to Sydney to trade shows and on behalf of business, looking to establish, to attract businesses to move to the Central Coast. So I'm not quite sure what the case is put, and it's a difficult one because all the areas are. Where I work in Sydney, people travel in from the Shire, they travel in from Campbelltown, they travel in from the northwest, Penrith, the mountains, all of that, and all of these areas, and Parramatta, of course. All these areas are competing for businesses. They want to attract businesses to their local areas for a whole range of obvious reasons. One of which is to get the spend of their within their area to drive it upwards. When people are travelling to Sydney, they'll spend their money in Sydney. They'll buy their cars at Hornsby on the way home, etc. But if they're living and working on the Central Coast, you'll get a much higher spend up here. I think you asked me a different question, and I don't think I've answered that question.
It's what can we do in terms of creating that voice?
Yeah.
And now we'll go into the real question, I guess, is should we have one local government here who can represent 5 state electorates and take that power to Macquarie Street?
Okay. The answer in relation to local governments is I think that's absolutely right. I think we should only have one local government on the coast. From a financial point of view, there must be cost savings associated with only having one local government. Having said that, it's also an argument, and I know the there's various commentators who say that one of the success of the state system is the competition it drives. So there is a question as to whether or not there's an inherent competition between Gosford and Wyong, which kind of makes it for, essentially for ratepayers, which makes it, drives the dynamism within itself. So what's the value on that? Compare that to what's the additional cost associated with running two councils. I don't know the answer to that, but that's kind of some sort of cost benefit that would have to be done. You will never get that driven by councils. Essentially, why would you threaten your job in council? Why would you stick your hand up and vote yourself out of a job on the Central Coast, where you're never going to get a similar job on good money, where you essentially can't ever be terminated? It doesn't matter how incompetent you are. Now that may sound a little bit bleak, but
it's real.
There is an aspect to working in the public sector which goes to questions of job security, and people can just roll their arm over as long as they don't take a risk. So I don't think you're going to get that driven. It would have to be driven Kennett style, and unfortunately our Farrell government doesn't look like it's going to be a Kennett style government.
I agree with that. What's the next 2 years look like for Warwick Ryan? Is it bigger than, and going for bigger clients, looking at your background? That's where I would expect you to take a bigger profile in both your markets, in both Sydney and the Central Coast. Is that going to happen next 2 years?
The next 2 years, I mean, the key to running a professional services business of any sort is to work out your leverage. Now, if you can't sell a widget, and if you're only selling time, then you have to have people, and you have to have people selling time, and they have to be selling time in a meaningful, value-added fashion, so that clients return and want to buy more of that time because they see a value in it. So the goal for me is to continue to develop to provide a service to my clients which is perceived as valuable, to extend my relationships beyond my current domain, and so that I've got a greater number of greater volume of time being sold into the marketplace, if you're going to sort of break it down to its fundamentals. To sort of put a gloss on that, essentially it's about identifying the needs within your clients and similar style businesses, and being able to communicate that and deliver on it. And if you can do that, then you're going to... Are
you getting better at that now?
Now I'm competing in the Sydney market as well. I've realised that I am a little bit of a minnow. Up here on the coast, I've got a reasonable profile in my area. There's probably would be seen to dominate the employment area up here on the coast. But in Sydney, there's a lot slicker operations who deliver, who can communicate their message into the marketplace in a much more sophisticated fashion than I currently am, I should say, than I currently am. And it's a bit daunting at times to see that in action, actually. You're sort of...
what do they do, Warwick? Because I see you here, and I support your position of dominance here.
Yeah.
I'll say that once, and now I'm done. What do you see the guys in Sydney doing that you kind of get a little bit of message envy over?
They've invested a lot more time into both the structure of their communication channels, how they're going to structure it, I should say, to be effective. And then they've delivered on it. And then they've gone further and they've delivered it on a way, they've built a system that will continually communicate broadly into the marketplace valuable content in a way that doesn't require a huge overhead. Now, to do that, you need to invest a lot of time up front, as you know, to get those sort of systems going that are low maintenance.
And it is a process, low maintenance process.
It is, and that requires, as I said, a significant investment of time. One of the aspects of Swab, the firm I am a partner at, is a commercial firm generally, rather than purely an employment-related firm. Accordingly, I compete for resources within that framework. So the resources aren't unlimited, and they will be as enthusiastic on my behalf as I am in pursuing them. And there's also, the reality is that the firms that we compete against, probably not so much compete against, but are in our market, that are in the Sydney market and beyond, the large national firms, are $1 billion plus firms. They are very big operations, and they have very large investments with not just one person doing a bit of marketing, but they will have a situation where they'll have 20 or 30 people in a marketing team, just focusing on that. So that's a big resource, and that's a big investment. So I see that, and it is intimidating to see it in operation. You realise that to some degree, when it comes to that sort of communication, I'm a little bit amateurish by comparison. So being on a program like this, of course, takes me into a whole new stratosphere.
And stratosphere, indeed, and even working with someone from the big paddle company, could lift that profile. But maybe I can recommend someone in that space.
Yeah, that's right.
Later.
Do you know anyone who knows anything about marketing or promoting businesses?
Let's talk about that in a moment. We give everyone the opportunity to have a rant, but in this case, I'll let you suggest. It's not going to be a rant; it's going to be a cogent dissertation.
Yeah. Okay. On
improving business on the Central Coast.
Okay. There is no silver bullet. That's the. If it was that simple, then it would have been done. Some of the obstructions to improving business on the Central Coast are, I guess to some degree, an articulate voice for advocating why development and business is so fundamental to the Central Coast, not just from a purely dollars basis, but from a social basis. And why, in fact, by having business on the Central Coast thriving, improves the social fabric of our society. And that is a voice that I think is missing. My thoughts on it, for what they're worth, are that when you are losing 40 or 50,000 people a day from the Central Coast, often some of the more gifted or educated or experienced people, and they are selling their services into someone else's market, you've lost those skills locally. But furthermore, at a community level, those people are suddenly effectively working 12 plus hours every day by the time they get on a train or in their car and drive. By the time they return at 7:30 at night, they're not going to the PNC meeting. They're not at board training down at Terrigal. They're not involved in their local churches or their local Rotary. They are people who just exist in the Central Coast and then show up on the weekends and try and participate as well as possible. All of that is lost, and the families around them are under a degree of stress. The person left behind, as it were, to try and hold it all together. It really undermines it poses a real challenge for the Central Coast. Even in local communities, you don't know your neighbour if they leave at 5:30 in the morning and return at 7:30 at night. So you lose that sense of intimacy within communities. Is that indicative of all areas in the Central Coast? No, it's not. but it is certainly a feature. The more people are connected and working within the Central Coast, the greater the quality of life for all people on the Central Coast, and the more intimate, the greater intimacy and identification that people have with the Central Coast. Because when you look at a city like Newcastle, and admittedly Newcastle I think was the third city founded in Australia, it goes back to about 1792 or 1793. It has an incredibly strong identity, and people identify themselves as Novocastrians. We've got to find a way of attracting more of those people who go to Sydney and retaining them here on the coast and finding them meaningful work to do where they can earn a good dollar.
When it comes to the NBN, is that going to lead us into a knowledge economy perhaps up here?
I think it will certainly improve the quality of IT infrastructure, IT resources, IT services that will be delivered by local business. And that will be purely upon the basis that there's a greater capacity of all sorts of businesses to sell into our market. So, and for us to sell elsewhere. So whether we will meet the challenge, there is certainly an opportunity there, but there's an opportunity in Geelong.
Kiama.
There's an opportunity in Kiama. There's an opportunity in the Sunshine Coast, in Geraldton, throughout the country, to be selling product of whatever sort into our economy. So there's the opportunity there, but whether how we meet that is probably beyond my expertise. I certainly think that there will be a fairly rapid improvement in the quality of services and products sold by businesses on the Central Coast and elsewhere in the 5 years that ensue the rollout of the NBN. So the answer is it's going to be better times, but whether we meet that challenge compared to other areas that's a whole other question.
What part does the landing play in all of this?
If you're going to attract people, I don't know who's going to buy $1 million unit on the Gosford waterfront. My feeling is probably not Central Coast people. And if people buy it from Asia or they buy it from Sydney, if they don't use it, then there's a question as to what the long-term benefit that will come into the community. But I am not an economist, so it's difficult for me to comment on the cost, the benefits that would flow from that. I certainly would think that if the landing was having a decent quality marina up here, tying that in with the new entertainment facility
and office spaces.
And office space, how do you attract a second tier or third tier accounting or legal firm up here? What would be the basis for that attraction? Why would they relocate up here? A long way from, what business would they be able to access up here? Because there has been, and this is I'm meandering here a little bit, there has been a reluctance by larger businesses on the Central Coast to access local professional services firms, and they've gone elsewhere for them because there's a lack of expertise. But it's a chicken and egg. You won't get the expertise if you don't allow people to grow that way. So there's going to be a question is if you build this office space, who will come and fill it and what the motivation for that would be and who they're going to sell their products to. Are they going to be effectively back offices for people operating elsewhere? That's in itself not a bad thing. Or are they actually going to be professional services businesses that are actually looking to exploit the Central Coast market? If they are, then that's going to have a really powerful effect because it's going to raise the bar for legal services, for accounting services, for a whole range, for brokerage services on the coast, and I think that'll be a good thing. That will be a good thing. And if you have that kind of professional services infrastructure up here, you'll have it'll be just part of the narrative that would be told to businesses is to come and
This
swim
is
in.
why you should be.
Yeah, come and swim in our pool. It's warm in here. For all the right reasons.
I can't think of another time to finish, Warwick, right? Thank you.
My pleasure, Mark.